Just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do personally for social justice.
Sure. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I work at a residential treatment center in Westchester County. The youth at our center um, are mostly in the foster care system. Some of them are referred here through school placements. The youth in my program have trauma histories and emotional behavioral issues, as well as cognitive and or developmental disabilities. So I have been working at JCCA for just over 4 years, and I've been a licensed clinical psychologist for about 9 years. So I've done a lot of work in residential care. I've also done some work in integrative healthcare. Um, in terms of social justice, a lot of what we do here at JCCA is related to social justice. Um, Sadly, there are a disproportionate number of youth of color who are in the foster care system. There's also a lot of overlap between the foster care and juvenile justice systems. So a lot of our youth are sadly involved in both of those systems. So we do a lot to support them. So I think just working at this agency is an opportunity to work in social justice. Um, I also try to stay as informed as possible in terms of what is going on in the world around me and try to support and be an ally and an advocate as much as I can.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's definitely heartbreaking to see those injustices, but we're very glad to see that, like, to hear about your work. I did try to read a little bit about it beforehand, and I really like the work that you do, and it's actually something that I'm interested to. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, sir.
Um, but to move on, to get into a little bit more specific, how would you define gender justice and reproductive rights?
So I actually did a little bit of research on those terms because um, I want to be accurate with them because I think they're very important. So I did lean a little bit on the Gender Justice website and the Center for Reproductive Rights website. So, and I really did like their definitions. So I'm going to paraphrase them in terms of how I also see those terms being defined. So, in terms of gender justice, I do think it is looking at the diverse needs and experiences and leaderships of people who are being impacted by discrimination and oppression related to how they express and live their gender in the world. So, what we're looking for here is equality in terms of not like no one is being judged or persecuted for their gender expression, and also equity, which is recognizing that certain genders may have different needs than others and different supports and providing those, it's not a one size fits all approach to these things. For reproductive rights, I do think it is the really the right of every woman to decide whether or not that she or they want to have children or get married, having access to quality reproductive health care, and being able to make decisions related to their body and their reproductive system without fear of coercion or oppression.
Again, thank you so much for that. I want to go off the what I just asked you, the last question. Why do you think it's important for us to talk about reproductive rights and gender justice in today's society?
I think it affects everybody. So I think it's important to have conversations because whether or not someone is aware of it, gender justice and reproductive rights impact them in terms of whether it's impacting you directly or it's impacting somebody you know, or it impacts the society around you. So I think any society where people are not free to make their own choices about their body and what they do with their bodies and how they express their gender is not a free society. And if we're not in a free society, then we're not living to our best potential.
Thank you. I love what you said about that it affects everyone, that even if you're not a person that can give birth, have, you know, if that doesn't apply to you, it's still something that still affects you because we're living in that society, whether or not that we actually are affected by the issue. And that could be like with any issue, such as racism. Just because you're white doesn't mean it's not going to affect you. So I appreciate you saying that. And that brings me to my next question, which is, what do you think the effects will be, or even the effects you see now, whether in your personal life or in your work, about the overturning of Roe versus Wade?
I think, not to be overly dramatic, I think it's going to be catastrophic. And I think we're already seeing negative ripple effects across the country of states who have used that to put in place laws that are incredibly restrictive and pervasive, sorry. And I'm, what's the word I'm looking for here? Invasive, in terms of women. So women are being put at a higher health risk, um, because doctors are now afraid to make decisions that are in the best interest of the mother's health because of fear of being prosecuted. I think we are going to see more women, and sadly more women of color, being put in situations that are physically, financially, emotionally unsafe for them because they're not able to make decisions about being a parent or the number of children that they want to have in their family.
Thank you for that. I know we've all been seeing already, as you said, catastrophic things happening, because of just that overturning of that law, that it's just a really difficult thing, and it doesn't stop abortions, it just stops safe abortions.
Exactly. It's an excellent point.
And that then would make me want to ask you, how would you say then safe access to abortions positively affects women, even those that might disagree with abortions in general?
I think it's important to keep in mind that abortions are not just being sought out by women who have sex and inadvertently get pregnant and don't want to be pregnant. So sometimes abortions are necessary because continuing to carry the fetus puts the woman's health at risk. And especially for a non-viable fetus, so a fetus that is not going to live outside of the womb, that's a really horrible thing to put someone through. So there was an article recently in the New York Times about, there's a group of women I think are suing. I want to say the state of Texas. I'm not 100% sure, but one of their stories was it was a woman who was pregnant through IVF. So this is a woman who spent time and money and put in a lot of effort to get pregnant, and had a pregnancy that was not viable and was also going to make her very sick and potentially kill her. And the medical providers where she was would not do anything about it until she was septic. Until so she was basically, I mean, not to be dramatic, on the brink of death before somebody would intervene and remove the fetus that was putting her in this dangerous situation. So I think that's an important piece of the abortion conversation that gets left out. And beyond that piece, it is a woman's right to choose. It is Not everybody wants to be a parent. Not everybody is in a position to be a parent. And forcing women to carry pregnancies to full term puts physical and emotional distress on them, puts them in financial distress. And having safe access to abortion gives women the opportunity to be autonomous and to make their own decisions and to live safe and healthy lives, which then further support the other people in their lives and society in general.
Thank you for that. I love that you said, like, autonomous, because that's a thing that is often overlooked, that it's like that what it literally takes away their rights to their bodily autonomy is the main part of the conversation. So, and I have heard other stories similar to that, of just even doctors that want to help and they just don't want to now get fired because even if it seems like it's a life saving thing, not rather than just like a wanted abortion, that they could still, they're like unsure and they have to like call lawyers and things like that. So it's a very, very sad thing. But thank you for sharing that. Um, and I know that at JCCA you work a great deal with children, adolescents, and young adults, as you said. How do you think abortion access or the lack of it would affect children? And do you happen to see that by any chance now in your work?
I don't know that I see it directly in my work currently. I think it is something that could definitely come up at any moment. Um, I think the impact it has on children in general is, especially, I'm going to speak more towards for younger children, um, of them witnessing and living in a society where they're getting the message that they don't have control over their own bodies. People who are important to them don't have control over their own bodies. And also living or witnessing the stress it places on the family if they are in a situation where there is an unwanted pregnancy and there's not an opportunity to abort that pregnancy, of forcing the family to go through with it, of like the stress of that puts on the family. Like children are very observant, they're very aware of things. I think about my adolescents and my young adult clients. So um, youth in the foster care system are at a higher risk of being commercially sexually exploited. Youth with mental health issues, youth who have histories of trauma, youth who have cognitive and intellectual disabilities, all of those things put them at risk. So I would hate for one of my youth to be in a situation where they are being exploited in a way and they, and a pregnancy results in that and they can't make a decision that's best for them about what to do about that pregnancy.
Yeah, you brought up two good points of what you just said now about them themselves being adolescent and not being able to carry out that pregnancy. And also the fact of what we just said before, whether they are the ones getting pregnant, if it's a family member, that it affects everyone, um, as you said before. So, uh, thank you for that. Um, and to move on, how do you think, and we kind of touched upon it before, I think you already said a little bit. How do you think that decriminalization of abortion can positively affect or improve the lives of others, even those that consider themselves pro-life?
Well, so I think in a more global, maybe more abstract way, it sends the message that people own their own bodies. So that you have the right and responsibility of taking care of your own body and making decisions about what happens with your body and what's going on with that, which I think can only be a positive message to the world. Um, I think it saves lives by not putting doctors in positions where they're afraid of losing their medical license or going to prison by performing a necessary procedure. So there's a life saving component to it. I think it also frees up the legal system a bit, right? Instead of having cases brought about abortions being done that are they or are they not criminal, those are resources that could be used to manage other cases too.
Thank you. You brought up a good point of like how the doctors as well are being negatively affected, and that this just brings autonomy to everyone and sends that message, whether or not they would want to have an abortion or not. Um,
I'm sorry, I just want to add a little addendum to that because I think
yeah,
you said something really important earlier about these laws are not preventing abortions, they're only preventing safe abortions. So I think on the other side of that, of like who is actually going to be charged and penalized for abortions, it is not going to be an upper class white woman. She will be able to find an abortion. It's going to be women of color, women lower SES statuses who are going to be more targeted and disproportionately represented in being charged or prosecuted or convicted of these crimes, which is just going to even further them being shuffled into the prison system where they don't belong.
Yes, exactly. And you perfectly segued me into the next question, which is what are ways that society, including educators, politicians, social workers, psychologists, and chairs of committees like you, or even the general public, can address and even improve the reproductive disparities of people of color?
Vote. So as like voting is our right, it's our privilege, it's our voice, and voting in little and big elections because a lot of these decisions are being made at state and municipal levels. So not just voting for presidents, voting for governors, voting for state legislatures, vote leaders, voting for county clerks, voting for DAs, voting for sheriffs, like voting for the people who are going to be creating and enforcing the laws in your neighborhood and your state. Um, that is how we create change. It has to start at the lower levels. So I think that's like number. If there was one thing I think that people could do, voting would be it. And I mean, and that also pulls into a little bit of who's able to vote. Um, and so making sure that advocating for voting rights for for the John Lewis Voting Right Act to be passed, so that everybody's vote can be counted and heard. Um, so I think that's a huge thing. I think speaking up, um, as a white woman, I have a lot of privilege. As a white educated woman, I have a lot of privilege. And I think it's important for me to use that privilege to speak up for people who don't have it and to be an ally and an advocate and an accomplice with them to make sure that they have the same rights and freedoms that I do. So I think that's another thing, showing up, like speaking up, educating, learning information, making sure that you're getting your information from credible sources. Uh, I think, you know, providing safe spaces for people to speak about topics that may be uncomfortable or maybe controversial. If you have funds, donating to causes and groups that are supporting women of color and making sure that they have access to all of the things that they need.
Yes, thank you. You brought up good point about voting, where like a lot of people think only the big elections matter when you have to start small and go up from there, and just everyone matters because you're also living in that place where the where laws are passed, and someone of that state legislator can just decide that abortions aren't legal or other things involving that. And
Right.
also the privilege thing is such a powerful thing that we often overlook because it's privilege is quite literally that you don't have to like face through it or don't even have to look. You can look away because it's not affecting you, or at least not to that degree. Um, so thank you for touching upon that. You're bringing up very good points. And then I would like to ask you, how do you view and possibly how would you educate others to view reproductive rights as a human rights issue rather than a political issue?
That's an excellent question. And I think it is a lot. I think so. The type of therapy I tend to practice is dialectical behavior therapy. And there's a component of it called the kernel of truth. And that if we can find the kernel of truth together, we can connect on it and go from there. So I think it's helping people find the kernel of truth about people's bodies you want your body to belong to yourself. Like you want to have your own body. And I think most people would agree to that, that they would want to have responsibility and ownership of their own body, or even on a more basic level, that we want the world to be a better place, that we want the world to be safer and people to be happier and for society to work together. Like these are things I think almost everybody wants. So if we can connect on that level, I think it brings about more of a conversation of like, okay, so we want these things, we have some common goals. How do we get to them? What do we do? And I think talking more about, bringing more of the stories of the women who aren't, are seeking abortions not because they don't want another child in the family or the condom broke or whatever, or they're too young or whatever it is, but somebody who really wanted this baby, who wanted to be pregnant, who wanted to have a baby, and because of whatever, because of uncontrollable circumstances in their life, have to make one of the worst decisions they will ever have to make. And are probably heartbroken and devastated and not going into this decision lightly. And it's your neighbor, it's your sister-in-law, it's your child's kindergarten teacher, it's people you know. So I think putting the human face on it brings it more back to a human rights issue and can bring it closer to home to people, and taking it out of it's not a Democratic or Republican or whatever issue. It is, it is a society issue. It is a human issue.
Yes, it's not like abortion is one size fits all as to the reason of like why people get it. And like you said, a lot of people don't even want to have that, but it's when they don't even have the option that makes it extremely difficult. Um, and then we're already at my last question, which is that uh you've worked with the LGBTQ plus population in different settings. How do you believe that a person's different identities, such as their gender, but also class, race, etc., impact their rights and access to reproductive rights? And I know you actually did touch upon this before a little bit.
So I think it's sad to say, and I'm going to speak mostly for this United States society because that's where we live and that's what I know. In our society, the more money you have, the better healthcare you get, for the most part. The more access you have, the more resources you have, the more preventative opportunities you have. Um, so, and I think most of medicine, especially, is geared towards cisgender, heterosexual white men. Those tend to be who are included in research studies. The of illnesses or things that affect them tend to get a lot of focus and a lot of funding to be studied. So in terms of the quality of care, if you are not a white cisgender heterosexual man, there's an impact there. And I think that shows up in how even just offices look, right? So walking into an office and being referred to as your dead name, if you are someone who's trans, like that sends you a message. Having bathrooms that are only gendered sends a message. The types of chairs you have, is there space for a wheelchair? Are there chairs that are accessible to people who have crutches or who are, a bigger size? Do you have the equipment they need? Like all of these things send a message about what kind of healthcare you're going to get in that setting. And I think more often than not, it is that's not taken into consideration by providers. Um, I think I went off on a tangent there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you addressed how like those different identities are impacted. Would you like to touch a little bit more about specifically for reproductive rights in healthcare? You said a little bit about other things, such as inclusivity in those, but just a reproductive rights aspect, if you want to
Right.
answer.
Well, I think not women's biology is not the same. Like it's another, like not one size fits all. So being mindful of that, and for women, for trans women or trans men, how that how providers treat them can be different. So looking for somebody who is affirming, who recognizes that your genitalia does not define you, and can provide care that is for your entire body. So you may have somebody who is a trans man who has a uterus. So recognizing that this person is a man who has a uterus and needs, so will need gynecological care because of that, and being respectful of what that gynecological care is going to look like as compared to somebody who is a cisgendered woman. Um, and again, I think it comes back to this idea of body autonomy, right? So like, if we have autonomy over our reproductive systems, we have autonomy over our bodies, which means we have autonomy over how we represent those bodies and present those bodies in the world. So reproductive rights intersects with a lot of other rights as well.
Yes, you're so right with that last statement. And just to go a little bit back when you said about when you were talking about trans people, I think it's often, even in our language of using right now, for example, we often just say women and reproductive rights when it does affect others of different gender identities. So it's important to, as you said, to accommodate for that and be sensitive around that. And yeah, that's all I have to ask. If any of my group members have any extra questions based off of what you said, they can ask. But but anyway, we want to thank you for sitting down with us to answer some of our questions and really helped a lot.